In American history, few corporations have ever straddled the clear blue skies of commercial aviation, left their mark on top-secret military programs, and simultaneously stood as a symbol of national pride, quite like Boeing. Founded in the early 20th century, Boeing didn't just build the legendary 747s, it became part of the very fabric of America's industrial and defense legacy. The B-52 bombers, C-17 transport planes, military satellites, and even Air Force One, the president's official aircraft, all bear the Boeing name. It's a powerful blend of technology, economic might, and national prestige. For decades, Boeing was seen as the embodiment of the American dream, the desire to reach further, conquer the skies, and expand influence across the globe. But when a company reaches the level of a national icon, its actions are no longer just about production and profit. Every strategic decision carries political weight. Choosing where to build a factory, signing a contract, even the way a technical crisis is handled, these are no longer issues confined to shareholders or customers. They touch on national pride, national security, and the balance of global power. Boeing, once just a company, has become a political economic institution, where the line between commerce and national strategy is increasingly blurred. That's precisely why what seemed like a routine move, relocating part of a production line to Mexico, sent shockwaves through American politics. For any other multinational, shifting operations to reduce costs is business as usual. But for Boeing, that decision felt like a crack forming in a once unshakable bronze statue called American pride. It raised not just concerns over profitability, but sparked fears about industrial sovereignty, about dependency on global supply chains, and above all, about the loyalty of a national symbol to its homeland. In a climate where protectionism and the America First slogan are on the rise, that relocation move became an instant flashpoint. Americans who had already seen countless factories leave and industrial towns fall into decline now feared that even their last great symbol might turn its back on them. And when a corporation like Boeing begins to waver under the pressure of globalization, it's as if the very core of American pride is being shaken. So it came as no surprise when the White House responded immediately. Donald Trump, a president known for bold declarations and hardline protectionist policies, took this as a direct challenge. A national symbol cannot and must not act outside the will of the American people. It all began with a decisive move, but before becoming a political firestorm, it was sparked by a seemingly insignificant moment. A brief phone call, just a few minutes long, between Trump and Boeing's CEO, Kelly Ortberg. And from that short exchange, a geopolitical storm began to take shape. Ladies and gentlemen, this journey is far from over. Hit that subscribe button so we can continue walking this path together, and don't miss the powerful insights still to come. Every major story often begins with a moment that seems small and inconsequential. And for Boeing, the first spark was contained in just a few brief minutes. A phone call between President Donald Trump and Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg. No cameras, no advisors or aides interrupting. Just two men, a president with a booming ego and a corporate leader holding the fate of hundreds of thousands of workers in his hands. As always, Trump didn't beat around the bush. American planes must be built on American soil. If not, you'll pay the price. Blunt, direct. Words that hit like a concrete block. Kelly Ortberg, seasoned from years navigating the global business landscape, wasn't easily shaken. He responded with equal candor. Boeing survives thanks to international competitiveness, a global supply chain, and cost optimization. Forcing the entire operation back to the US would skyrocket production costs, and it would be American Airlines, Boeing's biggest clients, who would ultimately bear the burden. The call ended quickly, but its aftershocks rippled like a tsunami. The White House wasted no time. A new executive order was issued. Every Boeing aircraft assembled outside US territory, when sold to domestic airlines, would face a staggering 200% tariff. This wasn't just an economic blow aimed at Boeing, it was a warning shot to all of corporate America. The America First era would offer no compromises. If you choose globalization over standing behind the American flag, you will pay. The policy instantly ignited deep division. Trump supporters saw it as a necessary move to protect American workers, to preserve jobs in places like Wichita and Everett. But critics argued it was a self-inflicted wound. Boeing would lose its competitive edge, its markets, and eventually its position on the global stage. Inside Boeing's boardrooms, the numbers started bleeding red. Forecasts showed billions of dollars in contracts at risk. Thousands of aircraft could miss delivery deadlines. But what Trump didn't anticipate was the chain reaction waiting to erupt. Across the Pacific, Beijing had a clear view of Boeing's Achilles heel. China is Boeing's single largest customer, with hundreds of orders lined up for decades to come. And with one firm move, China could turn the fracture between Boeing and the White House into a full-blown geopolitical fault line. And so, from what seemed like a private phone call, a storm began to form. Before the threats from Washington had even settled, Beijing stepped onto the chessboard, armed with retaliatory moves no one saw coming. If the White House lit the match, it was Beijing that turned the spark into an inferno. Just days after Washington slapped ironclad tariffs on Boeing, China delivered a counterpunch that shook the entire aviation world. A cold, terse notice was sent to state-owned airlines, suspend all new aircraft deliveries from Boeing, and impose a 125% import tax on all American-made planes. Immediately, dozens of completed 737s and 787s, worth billions of dollars, were frozen in limbo, lined up in massive storage hangars in Seattle and South Carolina, with no customers daring to bring them into operation. This move wasn't just tit for tat in Trump's trade war. It was a calculated surgical strike. Beijing knew exactly where Boeing's Achilles heel lay. More than 20% of the company's orders came from China, a market with unprecedented demand in the history of aviation. Cutting off that lifeline was like stopping Boeing's heart from beating. And when an American industrial giant stumbles, no one stands to gain more than Airbus, its longtime European rival. In fact, China had prepared well in advance. New aircraft orders were swiftly redirected to Airbus in Toulouse. Deals for A320s and A350s, worth tens of billions, were inked at a speed that stunned observers. It was both a political message to Washington and a powerful demonstration to the world. If the U.S. is willing to weaponize trade, China can turn its massive demand into geopolitical leverage. Inside Boeing, the atmosphere turned suffocating. Financial executives crunched the numbers and realized just 1 year of being shut out from the Chinese market could erase a decade's worth of profits. Boeing's stock on Wall Street wobbled, with some trading sessions seeing double-digit losses, sparking investor panic. In Wichita and Everett, workers began hearing whispers of shift reductions, even layoffs. The storm from Beijing wasn't just pounding factory floors, it was casting a shadow over the homes and families of Boeing workers. And Beijing made no effort to hide its deeper objective: to clear a path for COMAC, China's fledgling aircraft manufacturer, to rise. Every C919 that took off within China wasn't just a commercial product, it was a statement of intent. China is ready to supply itself, to grow on its own terms, and to break free from dependence on Boeing or Airbus. As COMAC matures, future international orders may slip out of America's grasp entirely. That is the nightmare scenario haunting U.S. policymakers, the loss of dominance in an industry long seen as a crown jewel of American strength. The world watched closely, and allies across Europe and Asia came to a stark realization: trade was no longer neutral ground. It had become a weapon in the great power rivalry. An airplane wasn't just a vehicle to carry passengers anymore. It had become a pawn on the global chessboard, where Washington, Beijing, and Brussels jostled for influence. And as the storm beyond America's borders grew more ferocious, its impact began to seep into every corner of the country. No longer confined to international forums or the trading floors of Wall Street, the consequences were now being felt by workers, lawmakers, and entire communities deeply tied to Boeing, all forced to confront a harsh truth. A single global decision could shake the foundations of American domestic politics. Right on American soil, the first tremors had begun to show. In Wichita, Kansas, known as the aviation capital of the world, anxiety was creeping into dinner tables across the city. Tens of thousands of workers, once accustomed to the steady rhythm of producing components for Boeing, suddenly faced the prospect of reduced hours, or worse, losing their jobs entirely. Small corner cafes and grocery stores near the industrial zones began to see fewer customers. People whispered to one another, "If Boeing starts to fall, Wichita will collapse with it." Thousands of miles away, in Everett, Washington. Proud home to the largest aircraft assembly plant in the world, the mood wasn't any brighter. The once celebrated 787s, symbols of American industrial might, now sat collecting dust in storage hangars. Residents of Everett grew increasingly worried as the city's budget, heavily reliant on Boeing's tax contributions, began to strain. With the company slowing production, everything from schools and hospitals to infrastructure projects felt the ripple effects. A global decision had become a domestic earthquake, shaking the very foundations of American towns built on generations of aerospace labor. In the halls of Congress, debate flared like never before. Lawmakers from industrial states openly condemned Boeing, accusing the company of betraying America's trust by shifting production abroad. But there were other voices too, warning that it was Washington's own heavy-handed protectionism that had become the real threat. They feared that if the pressure continued, Boeing would lose its edge in the global market, and ultimately, American workers would pay the price. The hearings dragged on. Fiery tweets flew, emotional interviews flooded the airwaves, the divide was undeniable. And this earthquake didn't stop at economics or politics. It struck deep into the American psyche. To many, Boeing wasn't just a company. It was a living memory of the first flights that brought America to the world stage. It was the B-52s of wartime. It was Air Force One carrying the president. It was the emblem of American technological dominance. When that symbol came under scrutiny, the whole nation felt wounded. More and more people began to ask, can a company so tied to national security be allowed to chase globalization regardless of the consequences? Or has the time come for America to choose between profit and patriotism? In that atmosphere, the pressure on Boeing's leadership grew heavier by the day. They stood caught between two firing lines. On one side, a White House unwavering in its America First stance. On the other, a global market demanding flexibility and competitive costs. Observers hung on every statement, every decision from CEO Kelly Ortberg, knowing that a single sentence could send Boeing's stock soaring or spiraling. And then, in the eye of the storm, Ortberg made a choice few dared to make. He faced the President of the United States head-on. No evasion, no compromise. It was a defining moment when the fate of a corporation and the credibility of a nation came to rest on the shoulders of a single leader. In a raging storm that threatened to sink an entire empire, all eyes turned to one man, Kelly Ortberg. The CEO of Boeing, an engineer by background, was never the flashy type. Known for his calm, pragmatic demeanor and rare public appearances, Ortberg had long led from behind the scenes. But now, amid a crisis that was both economic and political, he had no choice but to step into the spotlight, becoming the face of Boeing's survival. Ortberg knew the risks. Behind him were hundreds of thousands of workers whose livelihoods depended on every assembly line, shareholders anxiously watching stock tickers bleed red, and international clients awaiting aircraft deliveries. In front of him stood the White House, a towering force capable of changing Boeing's destiny with a single signature. Most CEOs in such a position would choose the safer path: silence, compromise, or quiet negotiations behind closed doors. But Kelly Ortberg chose the opposite, to confront the President of the United States openly and unapologetically. In a live broadcast, Ortberg spoke with firm conviction. Boeing cannot and will not allow short-term policies to destroy long-term vision. We thrive on global competitiveness, on a vast supply chain, and on the trust of international customers. If we are forced to operate within borders, we lose the very soul of Boeing. His words rang like alarm bells, not just for politicians, but for the entire American business world. It was a rare moment in modern history, a CEO standing face to face with the highest authority in the land, refusing to bow. And that act transformed Boeing's crisis into something far larger, a systemic litmus test. In an era where politics increasingly shapes economics, how much freedom do American corporations still have to choose their own path? Ortberg wasn't naive. He understood full well that if Washington wanted to retaliate, it could cut Boeing's defense contracts, a sector the company relied on heavily. One suspended deal could wipe out billions in revenue. But to Ortberg, yielding to political pressure meant a long-term erosion of strength. A compromise today might save a quarterly earnings report, but it would shatter global clients' trust in Boeing as an independent, resilient company. So he made a gamble, not for himself, but for the century-old legacy of the Boeing name. His defiance, however, triggered mixed reactions. Some workers and Americans praised him as a truth teller, someone brave enough to prioritize long-term stability over short-term political calculation. But others, including lawmakers and voters, saw him as ungrateful, a man willing to sacrifice American jobs for global profits. The debate over Ortberg caught fire across TV networks, newspapers, and social media. His image had expanded far beyond that of a corporate executive. He had become a symbol of the larger clash between globalization and economic nationalism. Meanwhile, outside the US, international clients closely monitored his every word. For them, the question wasn't whether Trump or Ortberg was right, it was whether Boeing could still be counted on as a stable and trustworthy partner. And once that doubt took root, it spread quickly. In the aviation world, Boeing is no longer the only game in town. Airbus and COMAC are more than ready to snap up any market share left behind. At that moment, a new phenomenon emerged. Global partners began speaking out, and their voices would soon form another whirlwind, adding yet another layer to the storm now engulfing Boeing. It wasn't just the White House and Beijing. The shockwaves from Boeing rippled across international air routes as well. Longtime clients who had partnered with the company for decades began publicly voicing their concerns. Ryanair, the low-cost airline giant of Europe, issued a stark warning. If Boeing aircraft prices were driven up by tariffs, they would pivot to Airbus and might even consider sourcing from China's COMAC. That statement cut deep into Boeing's credibility because in aviation, loyalty doesn't come from sentiment. It comes from reliability and cost efficiency. In the Middle East, Emirates and Qatar Airways, airlines that had inked multi-billion-dollar deals with Boeing, began signaling hesitation. Their concern, if Boeing couldn't meet delivery schedules, their global operations would be thrown into chaos, resulting in massive financial losses. In India, SpiceJet and Indigo, considered major drivers of the next wave of aviation growth, also voiced unease over the political instability now swirling around Boeing. And in Southeast Asia, budget airlines like Lion Air, AirAsia, and Vietjet, whose business models hinge entirely on optimal cost, started asking hard questions. Can Boeing still deliver on its competitive promises amid Airbus's growing dominance? These signs, though subtle at first, carried enormous weight. In the aviation world, airlines watch each other closely. If one major client jumps ship, others tend to follow. Airbus understood this perfectly and quietly seized the moment. They rolled out attractive incentive packages, guaranteed on-time deliveries, and even offered flexible financing terms. While Boeing was mired in political entanglements, Airbus moved swiftly and calmly, reclaiming swaths of market share once seen as the US giant stronghold. Then came COMAC, once dismissed as the newcomer, now beginning to attract real attention. The C919 still wasn't ready to compete head-to-head, but backed by Beijing and a vast domestic market, COMAC was becoming a viable alternative, at least within the Asia-Pacific region. This was Boeing's worst-case scenario, that international customers might grow accustomed to a world where life without Boeing is possible. And if that mindset took hold, their dominance would begin to erode at its very core. Inside Boeing's war rooms, market maps were unrolled across tables. Strategic executives saw the danger clearly. If they continued to lose their traditional strongholds in Europe and the Middle East, the company could be pushed to the margins. There was no choice. Boeing had to make a bold move. The company began plotting a pivot toward emerging markets, regions where aviation demand was exploding, but where political constraints were lighter. Their eyes turned toward Southeast Asia and South Asia, where a rising middle class was starting to fly, and the skies were wide open for opportunity. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in Boeing's survival story, one that would take the American Titan into uncharted territory, not just to chase profits, but to fight for its very place in the future of global aviation. Cornered, Boeing was forced to search for an escape route beyond the markets that had become political no-go zones. Instead of continuing to focus on Europe or China, where Airbus and COMAC now held the upper hand, the company turned its gaze to fast-growing emerging regions, Southeast Asia and South Asia. These were places where the middle class was booming, where millions were flying for the first time, and where low-cost carriers were springing up like mushrooms after the rain. To Boeing, this wasn't just a market, it was a chance at rebirth. In India, now surpassing China in population and expanding its economy at breakneck speed, air travel demand is projected to double within the next decade. Airlines like Indigo and Air India are planning massive fleet expansions with hundreds of new aircraft on order. Boeing sees this as a vital gateway, not only to break free from Beijing's stranglehold, but to maintain a foothold in one of the world's most promising markets. In Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines have emerged as rising stars. With sprawling geography, youthful populations, and surging domestic tourism, these countries will require hundreds of new aircraft in the coming decade. But Boeing wasn't just showing up to sell planes. The company rolled out financial support packages, allowing airlines to pay in installments over many years. They offered technology transfer, proposed setting up local maintenance hubs, and even floated the idea of building auxiliary factories in these fast-developing nations. These moves weren't just quick fixes, they were part of a long-term strategy to turn emerging market customers into deeply rooted partners, thereby expanding Boeing's influence beyond the reach of either Washington or Beijing. Still, this pivot was fraught with challenges. Emerging markets are famously price-sensitive, and they won't hesitate to jump ship to Airbus if the deal is better. On top of that, governments in these regions are well aware of their growing leverage, and they use it. They demand workforce training, technical assistance, and even participation in the global supply chain. As a result, Boeing is no longer just selling aircraft. It's entering high-stakes negotiations where politics, economics, and strategic interests are tightly intertwined. Yet, with newly signed contracts in India, Indonesia, and Vietnam, Boeing found a breather, a flicker of hope amid the storm. And from that, a new global reality began to take shape. The center of gravity in aviation is shifting, from west to south, and from north to east. In this new landscape, Boeing, Airbus, and COMAC are no longer just competitors. They're engaged in a fierce, multi-front battle where every plane, every deal, every diplomatic handshake could redefine the balance of power in the 21st century. While Boeing struggled to stay afloat, Airbus marched forward with quiet confidence, the clear winner amid the chaos. Unentangled in the US-China war of words, Airbus deftly seized the opening, locking in a wave of new contracts from China to the Middle East. The A320s and A350s quickly became the safe, stable choice, untouched by political storms. To many airlines, Airbus was no longer just a manufacturer. It had become a pillar of stability in a volatile global market. And with that, Europe's standing in commercial aviation was not only reinforced, it began expanding into territories once considered Boeing's home turf. But Airbus wasn't the only rival. COMAC, the newcomer from China, was steadily emerging from the shadows of its Western competitors. Though still in its infancy, the C919 had entered flight testing and had already secured massive domestic orders. Beijing made no secret of its ambition to use its colossal market of over 1 billion people to nurture COMAC into a national icon. Every aircraft that rolled off the production line wasn't just a commercial achievement. It was a declaration that China was ready to challenge the aviation order long dominated by the West. And so, the global aviation industry found itself in a high-stakes three-way race. Boeing, the face of American industrial might. Airbus, the pride of Europe. COMAC, the rising ambition of China. Three powers, three visions, three philosophies, clashing in the same skies. Each contract signed wasn't just business, it was a win or loss in the broader battle of national prestige. And when those aircraft leave the factory floor and take to the skies, they carry not only passengers, but the weight of geopolitical power. At this point, it became clear that the story was no longer just about profit or market share. Aircraft had become tools in the hands of world powers, symbols of strength, ambition, and pride. And as the three-way rivalry grew more intense, one profound question loomed. Can corporations still preserve their own identity, or will they be fully absorbed into the machinery of national strategy, mere pawns in the global chessboard of power? What elevates the Boeing story beyond that of a single corporation is its symbolic weight in global geopolitics. In this new era, companies are no longer just economic engines generating profits for shareholders. They have become instruments of soft power, strategic pieces on the grand chessboard of global influence. Boeing doesn't just manufacture commercial aircraft, it builds Air Force One, the president's official plane, along with a vast array of advanced military hardware essential to national security. That's why every decision Boeing makes, where it places its factories, who it signs contracts with, carries an implicit political message. In Washington, Boeing is viewed as an indispensable pillar of the American security apparatus. In Beijing, it is a pressure point, a tool to be leveraged in trade negotiations. In Brussels, Boeing is a rival that must be restrained so Airbus can expand its reach. One industrial giant caught in the gravitational pull of the world's three great power centers. Behind every plane that lifts off the runway lies an intricate web of government agendas, trade agreements, and the invisible hand of geopolitical maneuvering. The questions that emerge are sobering. Does a corporation like Boeing still have the freedom to operate globally? Or must it now accept the role of an extended arm of government policy? When economics and politics become as inseparable as shadow and form, is there any line left between corporate interest and national interest? And if that line dissolves, what then becomes of global enterprise? Through its crisis, Boeing has laid bare this harsh reality. No matter how massive, no matter how storied, a corporation is ultimately just another piece in the power struggles between nations. And when those massive planes roll down the runway and rise into the skies, they carry not only dreams of flight, but the full weight of political ambition, of strategies being played out behind closed doors, reshaping the very order of the world. At its core, the story of Boeing isn't just a corporate crisis. It's a mirror reflecting the turbulence of an entire era of globalization. A single decision to relocate a production line, one tariff order, or a retaliatory move from a foreign power, any of these can send a national symbol into a tailspin in the blink of an eye. Boeing, once seen as an unshakable pillar of American pride, has now become a vivid reminder that no corporation is immune to the rising tides of geopolitics. Boeing's future now hinges on three critical challenges: restoring trust in the quality of its products, diversifying its markets to reduce dependence on a few major clients, and most importantly, preserving its reputation, the most valuable asset in the aviation industry. If it succeeds, Boeing may rise once again, weathering the storm and reclaiming its place as a cornerstone of the skies. But if it fails, those once mighty wings may turn into dead weight, dragging the company into a dangerous descent. The larger lesson, not just for Boeing, but for the entire world, is the fragility of the globalization model itself. In an age of resurgent politics and economic nationalism, the best-laid business strategies can collapse with a single tweet, a sudden executive order, artist, or an unexpected decision from a distant capital. The world is entering a new age where global corporations must walk a tightrope, balancing international competitiveness with national loyalty and pride. Looking back, perhaps Boeing is merely the live testing ground for a question all must face. In the 21st century, who's really in the driver's seat? Business or politics? The answer remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: every shift in Boeing's journey will continue to echo far beyond the skies, resonating across the global stage. If you found this analysis compelling, let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next gripping chapter in this ongoing geopolitical chess match.